Hey guys, how's it going? I'm back here with another episode of my ReactJS course. This is episode number 6, and today we're going to be using what we learned in the previous episode where we learned the use effect hook, and we're going to be using it in order to learn how to fetch data in React. So I'm going to make a lot of episodes where I teach you guys how to fetch data and how to handle data fetching in React, but this is the first episode where I teach you guys the basics of it. So we're going to be learning how to use the fetch API, how to use a library such as Axios. I'm also going to give you guys two different examples on fetching data from an API and displaying it inside of our project. And at the end, I'm going to give you guys an exercise where you guys can just do it at home. And if you want to check out the solution, it will all be in the description. So with that in mind, let's get into the tutorial. Okay, everyone. So like I said, today we're going to be learning how to deal with APIs in React, how to fetch data, and how to create an application that is fed by some sort of external API that sends data through some sort of request into our project and does something with it, right? So the first example is going to be a very, very simple one, but it's really cool because it will explain to you guys 95% of what fetching data in React really is, at least the basics. So basically what we want is we want to have this project over here, which all it does is when you click on this button over here, a text will appear over here with a random cat fact. So that whole project is very random. It's not like something very useful, but in order to generate the random cat fact, it's not going to be us generating. It's going to be, there's a database out there with a bunch of facts about cats, and they provide us the data through an API request, and we get it in our React app and just show it in our screen. So the whole process of getting data from an external source and displaying it in our screen is everything I want to teach in this video. So for those who don't know, an API is just some sort of code that was written and that you're using in your project, but it isn't part of your specific project or the specific part of your project you're working in. So an API can mean a lot of different things. In this case, this over here is a website called catfact.ninja/fact, and this they created some sort of API that generates this, and every time we refresh or I don't know, just go to this URL, you see the web page is kind of weird, right? It might look different for you, but the thing that is the same is that it will always show some sort of almost like a JavaScript object, right? This is not a JavaScript object. This is actually what is known as JSON, and it is a way to describe data. Now, you see it changes every time we refresh the page because this is just how this API works. What we want is we want to make a request to this website and get this data and display it in our project, right? So this is completely free. I made sure to get one that is completely free because you guys can just use it, and it's, I don't know, you don't even have to put anything. You just go to this URL. If you refresh it, you'll see you get the information. So how exactly would we do something like this? Well, first of all, we would have to have some sort of React project, right? And we have this one over here, very simple, nothing different from what we've been working so far. There's just a button that says generate cat fact and a p tag, a paragraph tag, which is empty for now, but we're going to put the cat fact inside of here. So to do this, we would want to fetch the data from this API. So fetching the data just means that we want to make a request to this website and get whatever information this URL returns. Now, this isn't a tutorial about fetching data and about requesting data in APIs in general, because I feel like if you're learning React, you probably already learned that when you were learning JavaScript. This is a main part of 99% of projects, websites out there. So I won't go too much in depth about the fetch API, but I'll show you guys how to use it to make something like this. So in JavaScript, actually, it's not even in React. It's also not JavaScript. It's just something that is built on and available when you use JavaScript. There is a function called the fetch function, and this function, it is used to fetch data from an API. Now, if I want to fetch data from this API over here, if I want to get this data, I could do something like this. I could grab the URL for this API. I would come over here, put over here the URL for this API. Then what I can do is I can say .then, because the fetch function returns a promise, and this will return exactly what we get over here. But it needs to be converted into JavaScript objects because we get it as a JSON, right? And a JSON, like I said, is just a method or a way to represent data, but it looks very similar to an object. So it's very easy for you to convert a JSON to a JavaScript object. And it's a lot better for us to deal with this as a JavaScript object. So what we can do is we can grab the response from this API request. I'll call it res for response, and just turn it into a JavaScript object like this. Then we'll grab that value and we'll call it data. And what we can do is we can just use this data that we get back from the API inside of here. So this is the very quick explanation of how the fetch function works. It is used to fetch data from an API, and you have to do it this way because that's how you have access to the data. I could do something, for example, console log the data, and you would see that if I put this over here, just over here, you'll see that we will get the console log. I'll come over here, refresh the page, and you'll see that in our console, now we have this object that actually displays the information from the Ninja Fact API. If I kept refreshing, you'll see the information will be different, right? We're getting it twice because of an issue I'll talk about in a bit, but basically you can see we are indeed fetching data from an API. But there's actually an easier way to fetch data from an API. It's a way that I prefer, especially in the beginning. Instead of using the fetch API like this, we can use another library that exists in React or in JavaScript as well, called Axios. Now, Axios is just a very simple library that allows you to fetch data, and in my opinion, it looks easier than this. So that's why I want to use it. It's very well known, and we'll be using it for the beginning of this course. We'll obviously migrate from that later on, but for now, using Axios is actually really cool. So I'm going to install this package by saying npm install Axios like this. Then I'm going to press enter, and it will start installing Axios into this project, and it should be done. Now, to convert this logic over here into a logic using Axios, we have to import Axios from the Axios library, just like this. And then instead of saying fetch like this, we can just come over here and say Axios like this, Axios.get, and we can put this over here, and then we can get the response like this. And with Axios, we can access this data over here by just saying response.data, just like this, response.data. Now, this looks a lot smaller than this, and you can see that it works the same way. If I come over here and I refresh, you'll see it still console logs the information. So it is working the exact same way, but Axios makes it look easier. Now, I will delete this over here, and I'll show you guys something. This is actually not a good way to make this work. Just doing it like this. Because what happens is, this over here will be called every single time the component re-renders, which is bad because if I want to display this data, the cat fact, you see it's an object, right? So I can just get this fact, which is a string, and display it in our screen, right? So you would imagine that to do that, I could just use a state like this, like we've done a bunch of times in the past. I can just create a state, which is a string, call it cat fact, and then just come over here, say set cat fact, and just set the data that we get back dot fact, and we say dot fact because you can see response.data is an object, right? It's an object which includes a fact property inside of it. So we have to say res.data.fact, and I can just do something like this and then come over here and display it in our screen. But the issue with this is the minute I save this, you'll see that it is infinitely fetching the data from the API. It's going forever. I'll obviously kill this right now just kill it because I don't want it running forever. But the reason why it's running forever is because think about it this way. This is the same reason why it was showing the thing on the console log twice. Because what we learned in the previous video is that when the component mounts, it will mount, then unmount, and then mount again. So that's why it goes twice. That's why initially it shows twice. But the reason why it's going for infinite amount of times right now is because this will be showing every time the component updates. And it will update forever because think about it this way. The component appears in the screen, the component is rendered and mounted, then it sets, it makes a request to get the data from the API, then it changes the state cat fact to be equal to the data it gets back from the API. Then what happens now is the component updates, meaning that this runs again, makes another request, fetches the data, sets the cat fact to be the fact that it returns, and then it returns again, it updates again and again and again. It's going infinitely. So what we want React to do right here is we want React to only run this once, only when the component mounts. So what we can do in this case is we can run a use effect over here, which is something we learned in the previous video. And if you recall from the previous video, we can make a use effect run once if we put an empty array over here, because it will basically just run when the component mounts. And now if we go to our localhost again, it is only showing once, it's not going infinitely. And obviously, if I refresh the page, you're seeing that it is kind of showing twice. It shows one and then immediately changes. And the reason for that is because, like I said, it is running twice. I mentioned this in the previous episode, that the fact that the use effect run twice for the first time, but then it just runs once and stops running infinitely. It just goes once. So the reason why this is running twice is because of what I mentioned in the previous video, where in React 18, the use effect will run twice because it mounts once, unmounts it immediately after, and then mounts again. So since this exists inside of the use effect, it is running twice. And that's not a desired behavior at all, but it is also not recommended in the newest version of React to fetch data this way. However, I cannot stress this enough that using this method to fetch data in the beginning is important because it will teach you a lot of stuff that it's better to understand when you are a beginner. So I want to let you guys know immediately that this will not be how we get data later on in this course, but for now, this is good enough. This is what we're going to be using, and this will help you guys understand what we're going to learn later on. So in order to prevent it from fetching data twice, I'm going to go against what I recommended in the previous video, but obviously you guys will understand why. I'll remove the strict mode from around the app component because for now, we don't want it to be fetching data twice. So you'll see that now that we remove that, if I come over here and I refresh the page, it is only fetching it once and only displaying the data once. And it's good, right? We're fetching data now. It's displaying everything in our screen. We're getting data from an outside source, which is this API over here, and we're able to display it inside of our project. Now, how would we display this by clicking this button? Well, right now, all we're doing is we are fetching the data, and once inside of our use effect, when we enter the website or when we refresh the page, what we want now is to click on the button and generate the new like an updated fact from a cat, right? So what we can do is we can just pass an on click over here, and then down over here we can just put a function that will be fetching the cat fact. So I'll say fetch cat fact, and we'll just do something like this. Now what I'll put over here is the exact same logic as I put over here, and if I put this inside of the on click, you'll see that when we click on the button, it'll now generate another cat fact, right, as we click on the button. And since we put all of the same logic inside of this function, now we can also just remove this and just put the function call over here, and it will work the same way. So this is the first example of how to fetch data in React. And it's very simple. You saw it basically required almost no code, just these 3 lines of code and a use effect. And it's something that we'll be using so much, so it is important for you to understand. Now, the second example is going to be a little bit more cool because it's going to involve some new stuff that the first example didn't include. Okay, everyone. So this is the second example that we're going to be presenting in this episode. The third example will be an exercise. So keep in mind that in this one, we're going to be working with dynamically changing what kind of data we request. So what do I mean by that? Well, there's this API over here, which is very dumb, but very cool in my opinion. Basically, what you do is you give it a name, such as Pedro, and it will give you, it will predict this person's age. Now, I don't know how they do this. Maybe they have a database of everyone named Pedro and just getting the average, or maybe they're using machine learning. I don't really care. I just care that we are fetching this data from an API and it's giving us some information. So if I were to change this over here in the URL to something like Jessica, you'll see it will predict that Jessica is of age 28. So you can put any name. It's pretty cool. And just see what happens. Obviously, it's not super accurate because I'm 21 and it says that I'm 59, but it's just an example, so it should be fine. So what we want is we want to have this app over here, which it has a button and it has an input, and we can write on the input the name that we want to predict, click on the button, and then make the request and display the age. So right now, all we have is this simple app over here, and we have a button similar like before. We know we're going to be using a useState, a useEffect, and Axios, the library. So we already have all of that imported. So let's start working on making this work. So I'm going to put an input over here, which is going to be used to write the name of the user. You can even add like a placeholder, which for those who don't know, is just like the text that appears on an input before you type on it. So I'm just going to put something like this. Example, Pedro, just to tell the user that this is where you write the person's name. And then over here at the bottom, we're going to put an h1 tag that says predicted age, like this, and then we're gonna put the age of the person over here. So what we want to do is we want to create a function over here, which is going to be called whenever we click on the button. So in this case, we're not actually going to use a useEffect initially. We can use it later, but we don't need to use it because we can actually just fetch the data directly from a function. So I'm gonna say const fetch data, or we can put whatever we want as the name of the function. And then over here, we're going to call this function whenever we click on this button. So I'm going to say onClick and call this function. Now over here inside of this function, we're going to do something very similar to what we've done in previously in the previous example. We're going to say axios.get and then put over here the URL for this API, just like this. And it has to be a string like this. Now, what do we put over here, right? Because this is where we specify what kind of name we want to search for, right? If it was Pedro, I would put Pedro over here. But I don't want to do it this way because it will be predicting Pedro, just Pedro. I want to be able to type on this input and search for the correct user that I typed on the input, right? Change it depending on what I want it to be. So what do I do in this case is instead of directly just hard coding the name Pedro over here, I will create a state called name and set name as a function. I'm going to set it equal to useState, and this will represent the name that we want to search. Then, similar to what we've done so many times in the past in this course, we're going to come over here, give it an onChange to this input, and inside of here we're going to create a function that all it does is it just sets the name to be equal to event.target.value, which, as you guys might know, it just sets the state name to be equal to whatever we're typing on the input. So as we type on the input, this will change, and meaning that if we type Pedro in the input, this will become Pedro. So now what do we do? How do we put this variable inside of here? Now, if you're familiar with JavaScript, you might think that you would do something like this, delete this name, and then just, add the strings together like this. You can do this, but there's a better way to do this. Instead of using normal strings like this, if you want to put a variable inside of a string, you can actually delete this and use backticks like this kind of quotations. And then inside of here, where you want to put your variable, you put a money sign like this and curly braces. And now you can put variables inside of a string. So the variable I want to use is name. So all this is doing is it's going to make a request to this string and replace name with whatever the state is. And since we're making a request, I can say .then grab the response, or just res, from the API request. And for now, let's just console log the data that we get back. So we'll say res.data, like this, res.data. So let's see if this will work. We'll try first without writing anything. Let's see what happens. It'll probably give us an error. And you see it did give us an error because we just didn't put any names, right? But if we were to put something like Pedro over here, the state name should have updated. And when I click predict age, it should now give me a predicted age for the name Pedro, which is 59, which is the same as before. I think count is the amount of data with the name Pedro that they got, and maybe 59 is just the average age for all of them. So this is kind of cool from this API. But now we can type something like Jake, and see it's 40. We can type, what is a young name? Probably like, I don't know, I have no idea. I'll write Nate. Nate is a young name? I don't know, it's 46. I don't know. Every name has an average different than the other, but you can see we're getting the data and console logging it in our screen. But we don't want to just console log it. We actually want to display it. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to try to display a variable when we get the predicted age. But we don't have that information right now. So we're going to create a state called predicted age, like this, and set predicted age, and this will be a number. So use state will be 0 initially, and we can use this as the predicted age over here. And now when we get the data, instead of just console logging, we're gonna say set predicted age to be equal to res.data, and we got to look at how the data is looking, right? You see it's an object, and the data object will include an age, a count, and a name. So what we can do is we can just set the predicted age to be equal to res.data.age. And you'll see that now if we try to type Pedro, it will correctly change this to 59, which is the predicted age. Now, I don't need to just store, if I wanted to, for example, say predicted age of Pedro. There's many ways I can do this. One cool way is, since the data over here gives back a lot of information, not just age, it gives back the count, the name, and the age, we can actually, instead of making the predicted age be a number, we can basically set this to be an object and start it as an empty object, or we can actually start it as null. So why are we doing this? Because now, if I set the predicted age to be equal to res.data instead of res.data.age, now this variable over here, this state, holds information about the name of the user we are predicting, the age, and the count. So we can actually, if we wanted to, do a lot of stuff. So I could do something like this. I can say predicted age. I can also say name, right? And I can say count, and I can have all those pieces of information directly by using the same state to represent the object. So instead of saying predicted age for the age, I'll say predicted age dot age. I'll say predicted age dot name, and I'll say predicted age dot count, because all of those are information that we can get from the object. You'll see that it breaks, and the reason why it breaks is because if you think about it, initially we don't have the data. The state is null. So we can't access name from null. This over here is null initially, so we can't access a name from null. So before we fetch the data, this is causing our project to break. But in JavaScript, what we can do is we can put a question mark over here before the dots. And basically what this is saying is only try to access name inside of this object if this object is not null. Only try to access age from this object if this object is not null, and the same thing for count. So this is basically allowing us to not break our project while making everything work as we want to. And you'll see that over here, as you can see, we have the name, the predicted age, and the count. But if I write Pedro again, it will now update and show the information for each, each tag that we put, right? We can put more examples. I'll try Leslie. I don't even know if that's like a normal name. Apparently it is. It has 36, I don't know, Josh or something like that. And you can see it will work for every kind of name. So try it out. You can see this is the second example that I wanted to show you guys, and it looks pretty cool. So this is basically it for the two examples I wanted to show in this video. Now let's get into the exercise. You don't have to do it, but if you want to, just keep around, do it, and I'll show you guys the solution at the end and also put the code for it in the description. So with that in mind, let's get into the exercise. Okay, everyone. So the exercise for this video is very simple. I'm going to be using this other API over here called Excuser. It seems to be a simple free API that exists out there. It's really dumb, but really cool in my opinion. All it does is it gives you random excuses for different kinds of situations. So if you don't want to go to a party, you go to this API and it will give you an excuse for that, such as my friend's parents are going to be out of town for a week and I'm going to have to take him to the hospital. It's really dumb, right? But I don't know, I find it kind of cool. So you can get excuses for many kinds of different situations. You can get one for family, office, children, college, and party. So the exercise for this video is use this API, which the URL is like this. I'll click on the party one, this over here, and create this app. The app should start like this. You have an H1 tag that says generate an excuse and 3 buttons, one for party, one for family, and one for office. What I want is, I want to display an excuse over here at the bottom. And whenever you click on one of these buttons, for example, I click on the party one, it will show a party excuse down here. If I click on the family one, it will replace that one with a family excuse. Same thing goes for the office. And it will all make an API request to this thing over here. But keep in mind that depending on what kind of button you click, this on the URL should change. So for party, the URL looks like this. For family, it should look like this, and it will give you, a family excuse. And for office, it should look like this. So use the thing that we just learned in this episode to make this work, and come back when you're ready, because I'm going to show you guys the solution to this. Okay, everyone. So this is the solution, and you can see this is how it should look. You should click on one of the buttons, and it will generate the excuse, right? I can keep clicking on the other ones and it will generate different excuses. But the code that made this work looks like this. Now, you could have made this in so many different ways. So don't worry if you didn't make it the same way as I did. As long as your code is working, it should be fine. Now, there is a couple tricks in this solution, which I wanted to let you guys know, because it would have made everything a little bit tricky. So I wanted to point this out. That's why I chose this specific exercise. So in order to make this, similar to what we've been doing before, we created a function called fetchExcuse. And the difference this time is when you click on one of the buttons, we call the fetchExcuse function and we pass what kind of excuse we want to generate like this. We didn't even need to create a state that determines which excuse we want. We can just pass it like this, and the function will know which one we want and then put it right over here, as you can see. So when we say axios.get, which one we chose will now be the one in the API request. Now, the trick in this case is that we created this state, right? And this is like we were doing before. We created a state that represents the excuse that was generated. But when you set the state to be equal to the data we get back, if you take a close look into the data, you'll see that differently from the APIs we've been working before, this doesn't return just a JSON object. It returns an array because it has the curly braces over, or the square brackets over here with the JSON object inside of it. A lot of APIs will do this. So you gotta be looking at the API you have to see how it's structured. And since it is an array, because technically in this API you can get multiple excuses at once, in this case it's just one excuse. So what we can just say is we can just get the first element in the array and then access the excuse property that exists in this object. So that was a tricky part because if we didn't have this, it would simply not work. As you can see, it would simply not work because we're not handling the data correctly. So this is basically how to create this simple exercise. Don't beat yourself up if you didn't catch this or if you were unable to do this. It is a little bit complicated to start working with APIs, but you can see how cool this is because now you can actually start doing really cool websites that are dynamic because they are using real-time data from some sort of external source. So this is basically it. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and comment down below what you want to see next. Stay tuned for the next episode. I'm loving this series. Check out the code for this exercise. It will be in the description. And I see you guys next time.